Consider this, 25% of all of our waste at home is compostable material. Did you ever wonder how you could minimize your household waste? We can take our food scraps and turn it into something good, especially with the help of some worms. Join me, April Morris, in learning how to maintain a worm bin. So what is vermicomposting? Vermicomposting is composting with the aid of worms, but it can't just be any worm. You might have seen earthworms outside or night crawlers. Those worms are great and they do a lot of work for us out in our yard by eating the leaf debris and the dead grass maybe after you mow, but they can't actually tolerate the high temperatures that a vermicomposting bin can get up to. Today, we're going to explore the variety of worm called the red wriggler. While they're not native to our area, they are used in worm composting bins. Red wrigglers can tolerate high temperatures that a compost bin naturally goes up to, where our friend the earthworm can't really tolerate temperatures higher than like 70 degrees. The red wriggler also has a voracious appetite and lives in its natural state. I believe it's from South America, and it lives in the leaf litter layer, and it eats tons and tons of food. So when you're about to cook soup or make a salad or a fruit salad, you might have things like lettuce cores or celery ends or carrot ends. All those things that we would maybe chuck in the garbage, you can now take those scraps and throw them into a worm bin, and those worms will eat it and turn it into fertilizer for your plants. Now, the things you're going to need to have a worm bin at home are pretty simple. One, you need a bin. You can go as simple as one of these Rubbermaid totes, or if you go online, you might see that there are many varieties of vermicomposting bins you can buy. They get pretty fancy, and the prices range anywhere from $30 on up to hundreds of dollars, depending on how serious you want to take your vermicomposting. We here at Kane County Forest Reserve just do the simple bin method, but you are free to explore whichever type makes sense for your home. All right, in your bin, you're going to need bedding for your worms. Now, bedding can be made of many different things. We use something called coco coir. It is one of the most sustainable beddings to use for your worms. Now, coco coir is one thing you can use. You can also use peat moss. It's not quite as sustainable as the coco coir. The other thing you can use is shredded paper, dried grass clippings, or dried leaves. Now, I have emphasized that word dried because if it's not dried, it will act differently. So if you mow your lawn and you don't collect the grass clippings, if you leave them spread out and they dry out, scoop them up, throw them in a bin. That could become your bedding if you don't have coco coir initially. Coco coir can be bought at pet stores. A lot of the big box stores like Home Depot or wherever they have gardening supplies. It's also available online. And often it comes in these compressed bricks that are very light and they expand to a really big volume. And what you're going to do with your coco coir is you're going to throw it in a bucket and you're going to add water and it will expand like 3 times bigger than what this brick is. If you happen to have a little bit of shredded paper or a little bit of dried leaves, feel free to mix that in with the coco coir. All right, once you have your bedding in place in your bin, you can then get your worms, whether you order them or if you know someone who has a worm bin, you're going to add your worms to the bedding. And again, I want to emphasize you're going to get the bedding wet. The worms need a little bit of moisture because worms breathe through their skin. You don't want your bedding soaking wet because they can drown. So it's a little bit of fine balance. It's almost like keeping a pet, but a pet that's going to take care of your food waste. All right, once your bedding is in and you got your worms, you are ready to start composting. Now, we want to talk about all the things that you can compost. All right, now, like I had mentioned earlier, if you're making a salad, you might end up with a lettuce end, or if you're chopping celery, you might end up with that end on there. All right, you can throw that in. A lot of households buy bananas, all right? Banana peels, totally compostable. Apple cores, you can compost as long as you shred it up. Paper plates, napkins, paper towels, coffee filters. A lot of households drink coffee. All right, the other thing, if you have house plants and they have leaves that turn brown or fall off, you no longer have to throw that away. You could throw that in your worm bin. It becomes part of the bedding, which is awesome. Another way to keep waste from going to the landfill. All right, now let's talk about what to stay away from. This represents animal products. So one of the things you cannot put in a vermicomposting home bin is meat and dairy, and then a not related animal product would be oil. All right, so vegetable oil or lard, all those things have to stay away. Worms cannot eat that very well. One thing you can put in that is an animal product, I'm going to gently move this. Egg shells are compostable, but not the egg itself. So if you're going to compost egg shells, you need to make sure to rinse off those shells before you throw them in there. Now the worms aren't really going to eat the shells. What the shell is actually adding is calcium to your fertilizer. All right, so rinse them out, break them up, and throw them in there. And then when you go to take out all your castings, once it's done, you'll see a little eggshell in there, but that's okay. That helps the plants in the long run. So let's take a look at an established worm bin that we have going here right at Creek Bend. So we're going to go in here. I just added some sand. Sand is an important part to add to your worm bin as it helps the digestive health of your worms. So as I dig down gently, I'm looking for the worms and to see what we got an old tea bag here, to see the population that's happening. So you might have noticed the debris in here is very dark. Now the debris in here, the scientific way to refer to it is worm castings. Worm castings is basically all the stuff that they've ate, the bedding and the food scraps and the paper scraps that has passed through the digestive system and is broke down perfectly for plants. And as I keep digging, I am finding a healthy population of worms. So eventually your worms are going to eat through all of their bedding, all of the food scraps, and it's time to add more bedding. We're going to look at how to do that today. So to know when your worm castings have been eaten through by the worms, a color variation makes it very obvious. So if you take a look at this cocoa coir brick that is brand new versus the castings in the bin, the color and texture will give it away. All right, the worm castings feel almost like moist cake, all right, where the cocoa coir is very dry and fibrous. All right, once your castings are this dark, you know it's time to change out the bedding. Now, the way we're going to do that is actually we're going to shift over the bedding to one side of the bin and make an opening in here. So one side of the bin is going to get really piled up with the castings, while the other side, we're making that empty to put in new cocoa coir. Now the cocoa coir bricks, like I told you, are very dry. I already added water to a couple of the bricks, so they are nice and soaked and ready to go. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to scooch over this bedding. And as you can see, some things haven't been composted yet as I shift over the compost. All right, so I'm going to make a new opening in here. So we're about touching the bottom here. I'm going to take the cocoa coir that's been soaking for a little while and add it to just the empty spot. So we're going to fill this in, break that up, and as you can see, probably this is still a little bit lighter than the castings, even when it's wet. All right, and what I'll do now is I will get some food scraps and put it in the new bedding, and all the little worms are going to migrate to the new side of the bin. Give it a few days. Once all the worms are over there, you can do the same process again till you get the bedding all filled in with brand new cocoa coir. And that's the way you'll do it. And then that takes about 3 months for them to eat up all the bedding, to 6 months, depending on how often you're feeding your worms. In conclusion, I hope this video has inspired you to start your own vermicomposting bin, and at the very least to get you to pay attention to the food waste that's maybe happening in your home. If you're inspired to learn more about vermicomposting, that is a good keyword to type in, vermicomposting. It'll lead you to all sorts of resources for you to look up. Have fun with your worms. Thank you. That was